Welcome to Lighten Up TV, enlightening, inspiring, and empowering humanity. This is a journey of self-discovery. On this journey, we are in search of answers to the burning questions that have intrigued mankind for millennia. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? By merging scientific discoveries with spiritual revelations, we will explore the possibility that mind and matter are one and the same in a vibratory field of pure consciousness. What if this eternally expanding field of consciousness is of and from the same source? These revelations, that we may actually share one mind in a unified field that expands into the cosmos, has the potential to cause a powerful shift in the collective consciousness. On our fascinating journey, we will explore ancient legends, modern discoveries, and emerging truths about the spiraling creative forces that spun this creation into being. From spirituality to religion, superstring theory to the Big Bang, from gods and goddesses to angels and aliens, we will dive into the mysteries of creation. Are you ready to lighten up?
Starring your host, Suzanne Ross, television personality and producer, inspirational author and speaker. She is a 5D truth seeker and spiritual pioneer on the front lines, raising the frequency of humanity. Through her shows, books, and events, she has dedicated her life to activating the matrix for global ascension.
You talk about source, and it seems as if there are projections of holograms or holographic fractals, which can be considered reflections. Is there a source and center upon which everything is just a reflection of that could be considered real?
Well, that's the great intuition, I think, and deep spirituality, looking for a center, looking for something from which all things emanate. But the information that is given in the world is what is known these days as distributed information. It's not from a single source. It's there, everywhere. If that distribution of that information, which finds this distributed expression, if that itself is emanating from a common center, this is something we can just speculate upon. What we see is what we can know, what we can experience is the information which is there, which is all over, which everywhere in the world, which is in us, and which we can tap and get into and try to apprehend and try to live accordingly. But behind it there is a higher reality. That is an intuition. That is something that we can perhaps approach and address this question when we ourselves enter into the highest realms of spiritual experience. Then perhaps we get some answers. But these answers, what you now ask about the oneness, cannot come from science because they are beyond experience, beyond all possible direct experience. It's a question of an intuition.
And you talk about the deepest dimension as being the origin from which we come. Does that imply then multiple dimensions? And are we possibly multidimensional beings?
Well, there are various ways of understanding, of trying to lay out and explain what we experience. Multidimensional, certainly in the sense that there is a dimension of the explicate order of the dimension of the manifest universe. And there is below it or behind it or above it, as you like, whichever metaphor you want to use, there is another dimension, which is deeper or higher, certainly is transcendent. And that is what we have get an inkling of in a spiritual experience. So it's a logical inference in a way, but it's not something we can demonstrate, it's not something we can prove, because we don't experience it directly, we experience it indirectly. When we come to this understanding, then we know it's there. But there's a very great danger of personifying, of biasing this apprehension by putting it together as coming from an individual of some kind. I am deeply convinced that there are no separate individuals, not even on the highest level. Then the whole quantum universe is a seamless whole in which all elements are at the same level of reality, except when there is a deeper level. We move from a deeper level to a higher level, but not that there should be one part among them that would be the source of all the things. If there's a source, I think it's that deep enfolded order, the intimate universe, and the explicate or the implicate order itself. And I think that is what is the root element of a spiritual experience, that apprehension. It's a mystical apprehension, and we cannot go any much further than trying to recognize that it's true, that it's real, that it's happening, and it's changing our consciousness, changing our thinking, and changes our being. And that, I think, is the greatest thing that can happen to us, like it happened to you. If it's happening, would be happening to more people today, we would not have this crisis that we are now facing the world.
Spreading unity consciousness and the four-letter word love is certainly a higher aspiration of many who have awakened to the greater reality of our interconnectivity. Ervin, can you tell me about your own personal spiritual awakening? Clearly, the music was an important part of that. While playing the piano and traveling around the world performing, did the music then inspire you to realize the interconnectivity of all that is?
Indeed. You know, in my beginning of my venturing into the area of trying to understand this deeper experience and connect it with science, it was still while I was a practicing concert pianist. And at home in my house in Switzerland, where I lived for several years, and during that time when I started this venture, I lived there, I had a study in which I had a concert grand piano where I would be practicing during much of the day. But next to it was a desk. And on the desk was a small Remington portable typewriter. There were no computers at the time. This was way back in 1950s and yes, in the late 1960s actually, in the 1960s. And I would play the piano and I would allow my mind to wander. Not so much thoughts, but I just allow the images to come through the music. And I found that those images have a meaning. They are pointing to something. And I tried to express that in words. So then when I felt that I could grasp something of that, I would get up from the stool of the piano and move down to the chair of the desk and start writing on the still typewriter. And I would, day after day, I would write and I would rewrite, and finally nothing much would have left because I'd be crossing things out. But eventually a few ideas came through that seems to me these make more sense, that they cannot be discarded. And I took them with me on a trip, on my concert tours. And that was how my entry into the philosophical world, into the science world started. Because I took those notes with me, handwritten notes, and I would read it, I would speculate on them, I would add to them. But I would seldom talk about that, because when the concert pianist talks about his scientific philosophic ideas, they say, "Oh yes, he just dabbles in that, and it's not something you take. Let him do that. That's good for him, probably good for his music." But this was not to be taken seriously. So I didn't want to be dismissed like that. So I didn't talk about it. But one day, it was after the concert in The Hague, in Holland. I felt particularly good because the concert seemed to me that it went very well. It was an appreciated public, and we were sitting on a reception afterwards, and the person next to me asked me what are my interests, and I felt so good about this. And I said, "Well, I'm interested in trying to explain what am I doing, what is music, and what is this experience that I'm having. And how does this fit into my other experiences, normal everyday experiences?" And he turned out to be very interested in this subject, and asked me if I wrote anything down. I said, "Yes, indeed." And we happened to be sitting at that time at a restaurant, which was the restaurant of the hotel where I was staying. And so I said, "Okay, let me go and get my notes." And I ran up to the room. I got this handwritten bunch of notes. And I said, "Well, just if you want, have a look." And so he said, looked at it, and I said, "Okay." And then I talked to other people. And when I looked back again, the gentleman was gone. I said, "My gosh, there was no copies at the time. I didn't make any copies." And I said, "What's happening? How should I get those things back?" I didn't worry too much about it. It's about my own thoughts. I'll write them down again. But next morning, the gentleman showed up. And after breakfast, he came to me and said, "I want to publish it." And I asked, "Who are you?" Because I wasn't even aware of having listened very carefully to his name, and it's certainly not his profession. He turned out to be an editor of a famous publishing house in Holland, Martinus Nijhoff. And so I said, "Publish it, why?" He said, "Well, it's interesting, you should share it." So I agreed, and I spent another year working with this gentleman, with the editor, putting my notes into order so that they would make some kind of sense. So readers, putting in chapters and references and so on. Actually, I didn't have much references. I only referred to my own intuitive ideas. But there it was. After a year, I handed in the manuscript, and he said, "Yes, we publish it." And he did publish it. And this book appeared in 1963. And if I look back on it and people ask me, "When did you come up with these ideas that you're trying to communicate since then?" I said, then and there. Everything else that I've written after this in my life, probably like something like a series of footnotes to it, a series of extrapolating, articulating. But the deep ideas which came to me spontaneously while I was playing music, all those ideas are in this book, which I wrote without having practically read anything in this area of philosophy, except I read a little bit of Alfred North Whitehead, which I was very taken with his ideas. But other than that, I just thought on my own. And so that's the story. They published it, and then it was published. It came into the hands of various people, including the chairman of the philosophy department at Yale University, who invited me to come for a guest semester to Yale. And I was amazed because I had no qualification whatsoever in the academic world. I had a degree in music, but that certainly doesn't qualify you for teaching philosophy. But he said, "Never mind, we read your book and we want you to talk about this and to give a seminar on this." So that's what I did. And then it came a point where, to make a long story short, came a point where I had to choose between continuing my music career, which takes 24 hours to pursue. You have to have mind and body together for that. Or I would go and try to develop my ideas and communicate them so I could share it with others. Then I chose got an incident again at another place in Europe, in a concert, which was such a shock to me that I decided that I have to choose the academic world, the idea world, perhaps, not so much academic. I didn't care about being an academic. I cared about the ideas, about the way that I could coexist and interact with other people around me. So I chose that, and then I wrote a lot of books after that.
What was the title of your first book, Ervin?
Well, it was the publisher who actually gave a title. I had 3 different titles. I had 3 different headings of the part. One was the essential universe, then was the essential life, and the third was essential society. And this editor who took the book, who took the manuscript, said, well, people are more interested in society, so just call it the essential society. So that's what we call it. It was published in 1963, still available in some places in used books and antiquariats, called the Essential Society. A subtitle was an ontological reconstruction. A reconstruction. I'm trying to reconstruct what there is in reality. And so, as I said, it was a very daring book, but there it is, there it was, and that contains still probably everything I could think of.
It sounds like you had these ideas surfacing through your music and then wrote them down as concepts, deep concepts of the intuitive mind, but then you explored how modern scientific theory at the time could explain them. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, of course. I don't want to just write thoughts without having a ground, without grounding them. Grounding them has to be in science. So then I started working more seriously in science. I made up the lack of sheepskin the diploma by getting the highest level of the PhD from the University of Paris at the Sorbonne, because I've already at Yale, I've written about this, and the people from the Sorbonne knew about it. I read my books and invited me to do this PhD. So I ended up by teaching philosophy, being a professor of philosophy, without having to take probably a single philosophy class in my life, or science class. I've listened to, I've attended, but I have not been enrolled, as it were. I was not an enrolled student anywhere. I got my formal PhD at the Sorbonne, and then I got 4 other PhDs on honorary basis, and I got other distinctions, as you mentioned. But I have never gone through the mill of learning, of being in an educational establishment. And to that, I should say, as a footnote, to that I think also that I'm there to venture into realms where most of my professional colleagues would not dare to venture because they're worried about what their colleagues would say. And I don't care about that. I never did. I just write what comes to me, what I think is important. But as you say, I do follow it up, I do research it, and I do try to make it as concrete, as quote-unquote scientific as possible.
And that in itself is truly remarkable. It reminds me of world-renowned spiritual masters who come up with these very deep, intricate concepts of how the universe works, but you then enhanced it with an understanding of science, and now in more modern times, the quantum realms. And so you make it very relatable to a vast number of people, scientists as well as spiritualists. And I like your title, a philosopher of science, a systems theorist, and an integral theorist. It all explains it so clearly, but you have the ability to reach such a vast number of people with your approach, whereas the spiritual master may only reach those who have an interest in spirituality.
Well, I try to explain what the ancient insights, the classical insights that will be handed down to us over generations that how those actually mesh with science, how we can see that there is a grounding for them and what we're beginning to understand about the world. Because a quantum approach, a quantum science approach, is very close to spirituality. I'm now engaged on a venture which is probably already published in 2021 in January, as the plan is. But I have to write that first. I've just started writing a few weeks ago. And that is to give a spiritual interpretation. Oh, no, let me go back and say, no, they give a scientific interpretation to a spiritual insight. And the spiritual insight is what you mentioned yourself, is the Akashic field. So I'm trying to write a book on the science of the Akashic field, where I say that there are 3 basic laws of the Akashic field. One of them being the connection of all things with all things. And so this immediate, instant, universal, non-local connection. And that's typical of all ideas of an Akashic field. Another one is the famous ideas of an Akashic chronicle or Akashic record, namely that the Akashic field is conserved. It's a cloud, nowadays we would say.
Right.
Computer science, it's a cloud that maintains, that conserves everything that happens. And the third one is that it gives it a harmonious collective evolution toward a higher, what we can consider a higher reality, a higher level of reality. And I try to find the scientific backing for these claims, so that the what we consider intuitively an Akashic field is really the grand unified field of physics, but it's more than physics. It's physics and biology and psychology and all those, and culture at the same time. All of those things together are part of the Akashic field.
You just mentioned evolution toward a higher reality, and there is this modern concept of the ascension of humanity. It also has to do with astronomy and where our solar system is in the galaxy. How would you define the ascension?
I call it evolution. To me, evolution is not the survival of the fittest. I think that was not a mistaken idea that the followers of Darwin picked up. Darwin himself was not all that keen on it. We talk about the survival of the most interactive, or the most cooperative, or the wisest, but not just physically the fittest. So evolution is a movement toward a higher level of existence, I think. And that to me is the key element of all evolution. It's not conceivable that things will just evolve by chance and they wouldn't be here. There is a wonderful saying by the great astrophysicist Fred Hoyle, who said that the idea that the probability said that DNA would create a living organism just by simply a random shuffling of its elements. That probability is similar to a hurricane that blows through a scrapyard, assembling a working airplane. Well, I mean, it's possible, but random shuffling, random mixing, random interactions will never explain the world in which we live and ourselves in the world. So this idea of there is something in the world which I call the holotropic, the wholeness-oriented or orienting attractor. That in itself is the guiding principle, should be the guiding principle for our life, for our behavior, because then we would be more careful about what we're doing to others, because we would know that we're doing it to ourselves.
I want to respect your time, Ervin, but if I may just ask another question. You just mentioned DNA, and I've always been so incredibly curious as to why we only use such a small percentage of our DNA, or even such a small percentage of our brain, if you will. What is your understanding of that?
It's a good question. That's my understanding of it. Clearly, we can be much more than we are, actually. It gives us something to strive for. because I think when we are enter an altered state of consciousness, we're using other parts of the brain. There are different frequencies. What we can tell is that these mystical spiritual experiences come about either at below the theta level, way below the alpha level, delta or theta levels of the EEG, or go very high up over the way above the delta level. So either a deep meditative state or a state of exaltation, but they're non-ordinary states. So these are is something that we know, that our brain is capable of decoding frequencies that exist around us, phenomena that is not just the ordinary everyday phenomena. Our biology of our body is needed to enable us to survive, but beyond that, we are able to enter into other dimensions. The exploration is that first-hand exploration on the one hand, but it's very difficult because you have to enter into these altered states, and it's not very conducive to writing out what you experience, although some people are doing it. And on the other hand, trying to figure out from the experience of people who are entering these altered states what they really mean, what those states convey to you, and I'm trying to do that myself.
Do you think that as we evolve, we turn on more of that DNA or bring more of our brain online?
Well, that would be a physical, a biological explanation. The capacity of any information system any living information system is so much enormously higher than what we actually can tap into or use. So there are tremendous possibilities of actually decoding by using our brain. But think of it, if the information that we are seeking is a holographic, a fractal type of information, then we don't need to decode every part of it, because we decode any one part of it, and it contains, in potential and in principle, it contains all the others as well. So it's all there.
It is all there. It is just a matter of tapping into it. And in your book, thank you for giving ways to activate that holotropic attractor. I think you call it holotropism.
Yeah, holotropism. Tropism is the sense of the feeling of that attraction toward wholeness, which is love is the highest expression of that.
And you offer yoga, different forms of yoga, and then of course Zen Buddhism as ways. Yes, but as a musician, possibly sound frequencies as well.
Yes. Well, we all have to discover the way that we can connect, the best way to connect. I'm just suggesting something. I'm asking young people. I have 2 sons who are very interested in this topic. I've asked them to contribute to the book. I have many colleagues who are exploring this dimension, this practical dimension, and I ask them to contribute. So we're trying to map out a series of ways or approaches to sense the world as a multidimensional, interconnected whole.
And that will be in the book that comes out in January 2021?
Well, no, the first book is now the book which will come out in March of this year, the Interconnected Universe. Sorry, no, that was a previous book. The Reconnecting to the Source, that one. And then it's going to be the next book, which will come out the following year, or in January, a year from now, or perhaps the late in next year, in 2020, will be on the Akashic field, on the laws of the Akashic field and science and the laws of the Akashic field, something like that. We haven't finalized the title yet.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so very much for all that you have contributed over so many decades, Ervin. Your incredible books, participating in think tanks, being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. You have quite a legacy. But for me, the legacy is really around the awakening of humanity, informing humanity and inspiring humanity, that there is something much greater than is beyond this mundane reality that we experience, this 9 to 5 reality. And it is so empowering, my dear.
Well, we are at a critical cusp of a development, of a evolutionary history. We need to choose the future, the way we go. And there is danger of continuing the way we are. And then if we don't change in time, the things become very difficult, in some cases impossible to change. So that becomes a livable planet. Unfortunately, we are actually on that point where we have to choose. But there is still time. There is still a possibility, I think, of reconnecting to what we truly are, reconnecting to the world, because that means reconnecting ourselves to ourselves. It means to reconnect to the world. And that is the way forward. That's the message that I'm trying to put forward now.
So beautifully expressed. You're so very prolific. Thank you for your time today, Ervin. It's truly an honor and a privilege, and has been such a pleasure.
Thank you indeed. It's wonderful to find truly spiritual people who have had their own spiritual, genuine experience and talk not only about pure theories or ideas, but talk about from their own experience. That is what we need today, more people like that. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.